Kate, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start out with a quick intro.
Sure. I'm Kate Agena, and I am a content person, basically, a words person. And I started with a PhD in rhetoric, and I spent a lot of time at IBM doing basically technical writing, information development, and found my way into content design. And now I am VP of content design at SAP, and I just started. It's my third week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I also am founder of an online community of content design leaders that's called Content Design Leaders. And it's for content design leaders to come together and have a space where they can, have a little bit of mentorship, share ideas, and really help advance the field together.
I'm going to first start with a question that we ask all of our guests, which is tell me about the moment that you first interacted with AI, and you can define AI in whatever way you feel it.
I mean, that's the question, right? Like, how do you define AI? What I think of as today's AI, I remember when ChatGPT came out and everyone, quick went in to check it out and try it out. And that's kind of like the first real experience I had with what we currently are talking about with generative AI. Before that, I'd already been, working on a case for using Writer actually at my work. And so I'd been really interested in AI and what it could do for the writing fields, but I hadn't had much chance to use it yet. I'd done, the trial and that kind of thing. But yeah, when ChatGPT really was released to the public, that was kind of the first time I went in and had that experience of really like talking to an AI.
Do you remember what the first prompt was that you played around with?
No, I was trying to remember that and like what I talked about. What I remember about it is that I kept thinking like, why am I being so polite? Like I would be like, can you please, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I was, it's really a different experience that you feel like you're kind of talking to someone. And then you kind of realize, oh, well, no, that's not really what's happening here.
Well, talk to me about that realization. Like, what occurred to you that made you have that realization?
I was also thinking about, so what does this mean for me as a writer? And what does this mean for our profession? I've always been really interested in ways that we can advance the writing professions and gain more status. And so obviously AI, feels like it could be a threat. I think that at the beginning there, when I was first checking out ChatGPT, as a lot of folks who are writers, I think could probably relate, some of the experience doing that, like as much as it could be impressive, you also realize like this cannot replace me. Like this right now is nowhere near a replacement for a writer. And, when you understand how the LLMs are built and what it's actually doing, then you kind of understand, okay, well, this is not the same as what I do when I write. And that kind of calm things down a little bit. And then, I started experimenting more and kind of seeing what else can you do with it. For example, it's great at summarizing things. It's very useful as a way to summarize things. It's really useful when you want to take something and like totally do like a different approach to it, So you say like, take this blog post and make it a conversation or do something totally different that might open up a different way of seeing it that it can do in, no time flat and might open up some new ideas for you. But it can't do all that a human writer can do at this point. And I think that we have to really hold on to that human aspect of things as well.
You mentioned something about elevating the status of writers, and I would love to delve into that a little bit more with you.
Sure.
What do you mean?
Yeah, so it goes all the way back to my dissertation for my PhD. And that topic was that it was the beginning of iterative software development. And I saw that as a place where we could open up space for technical writers who were usually not included in the development process or the now what we would call design process. And they would come in at the very end and be told to just write documentation for whatever had happened during that waterfall process. And a lot of times, you're writing documentation and you feel like you're kind of writing for workarounds. So there are all these things that don't necessarily work the way that a user would want them to work. And you're having to explain step by step how you get around that and how you still get it done. And so I was arguing that that iterative process that starts at the beginning and, you make little bits and you change it and you see how it works and you test it, that would offer a space for a technical writer to be involved from the very beginning. And then they could have a seat at the table and bring in the user's perspective. And that way, by the time the software is done, it doesn't necessarily even need as much documentation because it had this person along the way who was looking out for the user and helping make things flow a little bit better in the actual design of the software. So this was early 2000s, before there were design orgs that help with all of this. That was the argument that I made. And a big reason for that was because that would mean that now, a technical writer is not, at that point, they were still sometimes like an administrative role instead of an engineering role. And if they're from the beginning of the software development process, how can you not say that they're engineers? And so if they're engineers, their pay is higher, just the status of the profession is much higher. And I thought that that was really more what is correct for technical writers. They tend to be really technical people. A lot of great technology has come out of the tech comm community. And so that was really the idea that I had.
Is there an evolution between this idea you have and where we are today, especially looking at generative AI?
Absolutely. So I was starting when there weren't design orgs, really. And so the technical writers were kind of the only people who were there who were really bringing in more of the user perspective. And then eventually we kind of evolved to where there's a design org, and now there's designers, and there's UX researchers, and there's content designers, or maybe UX writers. And I feel like that has been kind of the culmination of what I was really hoping would happen with iterative development, that we would bring in more people who were coming from the user's perspective, so that not only would we have, yes, it can do the things, but it can do the things really well in a way that actually is usable, that is intuitive, hopefully, maybe even a little bit, delightful. How can we really give the users what they need? And a perspective from a tech comm or a rhetoric or a content design background can really help bring that, because, we're thinking about audience and context and purpose. And all of those things need to be brought in to the software development process and the design process. So I definitely see it as kind of an evolution. Where Gen AI fits into that, I'm not exactly sure yet. I think everything's so new that it's hard to understand where that's really going to end up going for us.
Can you give an example of, I guess, a design experience or a software experience that kind of is the epitome of that evolution that you've seen?
I'm not sure I can. So my background has been largely in enterprise software, which is kind of its own beast and is usually not known for usability. So for me, like, I went through some processes when I was with IBM where we had, for example, these really complex dashboards, and only the people who needed to use them understood what they were. And after they brought in designers and we were just kind of switching over to doing content design instead of documentation, we did some redesigns of those dashboards that made them so much easier to use. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, because before, we would have the fields, and maybe we would help with the field labels, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to take it all the way to where, can we have a more visual dashboard, for example, where there are things that are, you can see a chart, you can see a graph, you can see how things are moving over time. That before it was really more, it's a database and there's data and you interact with the data through this interface, and that's about it.
I want to bring you back a little bit further now that we've kind of gotten the nuts and bolts of what it is you do and what you work with. But okay, you have a writing background and you're very deep into the technical role. I mean, it's not a traditional path for people who are communicators. Can you talk me a little bit through how, when did you discover, oh, here's the path I want to go on?
So in my undergrad, I was a humanities undergrad with a specialization in English. And I ended up being interested in writing labs, writing centers, which are, just like tutoring centers in colleges for writing. And I actually I did my undergrad in 3 years, and then I stayed for the 4th year to start up a writing lab at the college that I was at. And then after that, I went to Purdue, because the Purdue rhetoric program is they have the best online writing lab in the world, basically. So I thought, well, this is the place to go. I'm going to do writing labs. And I went, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever spent even a semester working in the writing lab. I know that I remember being in there, but I really don't think I worked there. So I started doing, teaching freshman comp as a master's student, and, spent probably, I don't know, a year and a half teaching freshman composition. And I got to the point where I was just like, I just don't know that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Most people who get a PhD in rhetoric end up being a college professor. And I thought I was going to be teaching writing for the rest of my life. And I went to my advisor and I said, I don't know that this is for me. I think I can't do this. I think I'm in the wrong place. And I had already been taking multimedia writing and some like visual rhetoric kind of things that are a little bit more on the design side. But this was the very beginning of the internet, really. And, this was like early 2000s. So it was still very new, multimedia writing, the whole thing. And I was really enjoying that stuff. And she said, you're just on the wrong side. You just need to switch over to the professional writing track. And you can teach business writing and technical writing and visual rhetoric and those kinds of things, multimedia writing, and you're going to be way happier. And so I did. I switched over. I started teaching business writing, tech writing. I taught some multimedia writing courses, and I just really liked it a lot more. And I found the tech comm community to be such an interesting community with so many different things going on. STC was really active at the time.
What does STC stand for?
STC stands for the Society of Technical Communicators, or communication. I'm not sure which, but that's the idea.
Cool.
And so I ended up there. And from there, when it came time to do my dissertation, I ended up at IBM to do my research in Silicon Valley. And so a part of the dissertation was also a study of kind of strategic moves that you can make within an institution to open up spaces for there to be change. And so the writing leader, user technology leader of IBM at the time, a woman named Lori Fisher, had gone through a really quite long process of, they had already changed the name of technical writers to information developers a while before that. But they were still actually administrative roles. So they weren't paid as well as engineers, and they just didn't have the status. And she went through a long process of really proving person by person that these people are engineers and they deserve to be classified as engineers. And she made that happen. And that ended up being, I think, huge for the entire industry, because I think it really like echoed far beyond IBM. And that was also when they were doing DITA XML, which stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. It's a very specialized form of XML that's used for writing documentation, and it was developed within IBM. And it was just the very beginning of that when I arrived there for my dissertation. And so I spent a year there finishing writing and doing that research. I suppose I could have gone back to academia after that, but I liked them, they liked me, and I just stayed at IBM for a long, long time after that.
It occurs to me as you talk about this changing status of technical writers, now information developers, there's a whole new path forward when it comes to prompt engineering, when it comes to, at Writer, our CEO says, if you can articulate it or if you can write it, then you can build it at this point, because we have AI helping with building things. Does that resonate with you at all? I mean, in terms of your story and where you think things are going?
So I ended up in content design, but I still have this, like really strong background on the tech comm side. And one of the things that I think is really special about the tech comm world is that they are really technical. And so that, for example, the DITA XML is a structured way of writing. And I think that structured writing is going to be so important for AI's future. And I feel like the folks that are coming from the tech comm world are going to be so much more familiar with that than, say a content designer who's coming maybe from journalism, who might be a really fantastic writer, but doesn't have that more technical side. And I think that the future is looking like we're going to need that technical side, even if we still are maybe moving away from, tons of documentation and maybe that style of writing to a different style of writing. I feel like that skill set is going to be super important as we figure out. So AI can do so much for us, but there's still so much that we can do. And what can we do to set up the content in the first place, and also make sure that the AI knows what that content is so that it can use it when appropriate. So that's really where I think that the tech comm side is moving along. I feel like there's a divide right now between content design and tech writing. And I think that we need to come together in the middle somewhere, or at least, make those bonds a lot closer, because I feel like skills that are coming from tech writing are going to be really useful in content design, but also that there's an angle that content design brings that's more about that design thinking side that tech comm is not necessarily familiar with as much.
A lot of times we say content and people think blog posts, right? Or social media content. Can you just give a baseline definition of what content design is when you're talking about content design?
When I talk about content design, I'm mostly talking about what I would call product content design. So you could think of it as the UI text, the UI strings, but I also like to think of it as really an end-to-end content experience that a person has. I always think of it as products because I come from a software product world. I think it can be beyond that as well, to different things on the web, but I always think of it as product content. So all of the words and content, because it's not only words, it's like, what else are we serving up to people that people interact with any software product from the time that they first enter, which might include like an onboarding experience that's not actually the UI, to any kind of progressive disclosure. So, you're in the UI and there's what you see at the beginning, but maybe there's like a little eye or something that you can click on to get more information, or there might be an interactive guided tour, something like that. And then there might be places that you can click and go all the way to documentation and see like a really long article on that topic as well. So to me, that whole end-to-end product content counts as content.
And you've created the Content Design Leaders community. What problems is your community solving by creating this community together?
So there's various things. It was sparked partly by this like emergence of many communities like this for design leaders, but design leaders don't normally think of content design leaders as design leaders. I think we're on our way there.
What do they think themselves as then?
Well, they think that design is design. It's visual design and interactive design, and content is something else. They sometimes maybe include researchers, but they don't usually include content people. And I think that's changing. I think we're getting there, and we're getting to this idea that content design leaders also are UX leaders. And for example, there are UX leaders who lead a whole org that includes content and research, and it's fine that they aren't an expert in content or research, and they can guide the whole thing. And I think there's no reason that content design leaders can't also guide the whole thing. And that's starting to happen more and more. That's one of the problems that we're kind of trying to tackle, is that conversation. And are there gaps that we have that would, be stopping us from getting to those levels? Because there's really kind of a pretty low glass ceiling for content design leaders. At a lot of orgs, maybe senior director is the very highest. And at most orgs, there's a manager or a senior manager as the highest person in content. So a lot of people are looking for how do you break that? And one way is to move into UX leadership. So that's one of the things we talk about. We also talk just like it's really a place to come together, because a lot of orgs are flattening and then they're decentralizing content design. So there maybe used to be an org that, has various levels and really has a content design practice that is, well formed and has content ops and different things. And then they, if there's layoffs and now there's just a few content designers kind of spread out, and they're reporting into a design leader, not into a content leader. And at that point, there needs to be some other way for you to get together with people from content design. And so the community is designed to do that for people too. Because, a lot of content design leaders, they're the only one in their org. Unless it's a really, really big company, there's only one content design leader, really. And so this gives them a place to come together, share ideas, say, hey, I'm trying to do this. Can you share some resources? Like once a week, we do a resource roundup, where like, what's a content ops playbook that you have, that kind of thing. And we just share.
A tangential question, but I want to come back to the community itself. But I'm seeing a little bit of a theme emerge here, Kate, which is there's this role in an organization as defined by an industry, technical writing or information development, for example, or content design. But there seems to be misperceptions or miscategorizations around it. Do you feel like that's kind of a problem that lights you up?
It is. It definitely is. And I think most people in content, in any, like in tech writing or in content design or anywhere in between, I think that that's kind of a common theme that we have, is this like advocacy thing, where what we see is that the people above us don't necessarily understand what we do. There's that perception that anyone can write. And, we know that that's not true. And we have a hard time sometimes making that understood at those higher levels. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we tend to be kind of beating that drum quite a bit of, we're here and we can do all of these things, that you're maybe not understanding our value, and that we want to make sure that people understand all the different things that we can do to really understand complex topics, complex situations, and end up with a specific content solution that really does what it needs to do based on business, based on the audience, based on, what we're trying to get done, et cetera, and based on research and all of that as well. That I think that a lot of times it's misunderstood, and they think, oh, well, the writer comes in at the end and polishes things up or makes things pretty and, makes the words pretty. That's just such a tiny piece of what we can do.
So going back to the community then, how are you rallying around that drumbeat? And also, are you using technology to help scale that drumbeat? Generative AI or anything else?
So, the community is pretty new. We're just ramping ourselves up, but we're trying to start building that. One of the ways that we're using AI in the community to kind of help me as basically the sole leader of the community right now is, for example, we have weekly meetings and I get the AI transcript of the meeting, and then I run that through Writer and I get a summary that I can put a recap in with the replay. And that way people who didn't have time to join can get kind of an idea of what were the main things that were talked about. It pulls out some kind of quotes that were highlights of the meeting. And that's one way to kind of save time and help people participate in the community who might not have enough time to spend an hour a week just, watching the replay. We also, for example, FigJam now has an AI feature where, if we spend a time doing a workshop in FigJam where we've put up a whole bunch of sticky notes on different topics, then I can use that summarizer in FigJam to pull out, what were the key points? Where were the places where people agreed on things, that kind of thing. And then also I've been using an AI video editor for making those replays to kind of, make it super quick for me to cut those and publish the replay, hopefully on the same day, which, those are things that I wouldn't be able to do normally on my own. And I see the potential for so much more that I haven't really, I think I've barely scratched the surface, because there's the whole, like the marketing and the weekly emails or a monthly email newsletter that I don't have time to put a ton of time into. But with AI giving me summaries and giving me highlights, I can build a template that will help me build a newsletter. And that doesn't really change what I'm putting into it. It just saves me time. So I want to look for those ways where I can use AI where it's really adding and not taking away from what I would suggest that we talk about, but that just saves me time and helps the people in the community get to those resources in an easier, faster way.
Are these community conversations about AI by any chance?
They are sometimes. We haven't done a whole topic, like a whole session on AI, but obviously it comes up. Our first month was on navigating ambiguity. So obviously AI was one of the big topics. The other one was actually the advocacy piece. What do we do to help people understand us, which actually AI is kind of related to, because that threat of, people above us don't understand what we do becomes even more serious if people above us might think, oh, well, AI can do that now. So we don't need writers, AI will do the writing. And so those two kind of go hand in hand of how do we use AI in the best way? How do we learn the things that we need to learn because we're already busy and this is kind of like a whole new area that we have to learn? And what does it require of us that we maybe aren't doing right now? Because I feel like there's this need to clean up the data, to clean up things and structure things and add metadata and all of this before AI can really come anywhere near its potential. And that's exactly the kind of work that companies never want to spend the resources doing. They don't want to spend time on that. They want that, oh, let's have an AI chatbot and we'll just hook it up to all of the knowledge-based content or something. But they don't want to realize that before we do that, we should really go through all that knowledge-based content. And we should make sure that the whole thing is written well, it's correct, all of that. And that requires the team that already knows what's going on to do it. And it requires probably a lot of reviews, and it requires probably some voice and tone work and all kinds of things that they don't want to spend time on. They think it's a quick fix. And I really don't think that AI is a quick fix. I think that it gives us the chance that if we put that time in, we can output it in a whole bunch of different ways. But we still need to be able to, as humans, put that time in. And so that's the part that I think that maybe they're missing. And as a community, we're talking about, how do we use this? How do we communicate something that's accurate in a way that kind of maybe cuts through some of the hype and gives an accurate view of, okay, where's the potential here? What do we need to be doing that's like the reality of what we need to be doing for this to be something good and not just be, like we've seen a ton of really terrible AI chatbots out there. And yeah, that's not what we want to do. So we need to figure out what do we actually need to do and convince those above us that the resources are worth it to do that.
So regardless of whether the conversation's about AI or anything else, what's your best advice for an up-and-coming content design leader to have that advocation, if that's a word, advocacy conversation with the higher ups?
We have so many kind of typical things that we do to advocate for content design, and all of those that the community is kind of already familiar with, just explaining over and over and over what we do. And to some degree, I think a lot of people have gotten tired of it and they say, let's just focus on our work. We're getting burned out trying to constantly be, saying what we do instead of just focusing on doing it. We've seen so many layoffs in the last year, 2 years. It's really disheartening. And I think that we do need to keep up that advocacy piece. I think that a lot of times the content design community ends up kind of in our own echo chamber. We talk to each other a lot, and we don't necessarily talk to the people who are going to be making the decisions as much. And so we need to make sure that we're also talking to UX design leaders who are normally maybe our next up in the line. And then we also need to be talking to product leaders. And we need to help that, a chief product officer understands the role of content and understands that it's not just, I don't know what they think words are because, to me, the content really is the words. Any software experience is like a conversation between the software and the user. And how does a conversation happen? It's with words. If you took the words off the screen, you wouldn't be able to do anything. If you took pretty much the visual design off the screen, you'd probably still be able to do something. And, you could have a chat bot that allows you to do everything.
I'm thinking of Oregon Trail, frankly.
Exactly. It's a conversation. It's content. And so I think that helping product leaders understand that content is so core to what we're selling and that there are people who are experts in content and can really help you get to a place where you have the right content for the right users in the right place, and who are also really smart about things like, AI. Like we can learn about AI. We can learn how to get content prepared for AI, to build patterns that can be reused, that AI is going to be able to take advantage of, to have much better output, that we can work on voice and tone so that, we can even have AI that really sounds like our company, that we can put in AI guardrails so that we don't end up with, fake information out there. There's so much that we can do if they are willing to resource us.
I hypothesize that as more companies start adopting generative AI, they're going to see just how important natural language is.
I think so too. I think they're going to realize like this is putting out a lot of crap, and we really need people who are words people to figure out, how to clean this up. And I think eventually they're going to understand all the kind of behind the scenes work that needs to be done to make that happen. And I think we're also going to get better at that because, for us also, like we have kind of a hunch of what needs to be done, but so few people have been through it that there's no great one resource that we can go to that says, here's how you end up getting great content that an AI can consume.
So you are brand new to your role at SAP, but I did want to quickly just discuss, as you're starting this new role and you're also entering a new era as a leader, how are you anticipating talking with your team about AI? And, if we could be a little specific, like what are you imagining AI playing a role in with your team?
I kind of have the same idea I had before coming in, although I do see that, SAP, like most companies, is already incorporating AI into products. And there's also, a lot of talk about how it's going to be used. There's an AI writing assistant already in-house, for example, that I'm just starting to learn about what it can do. But basically, kind of along the same lines of what we've been talking about, I think that we need to think about AI as this tool that we can use. There's been changes in tools for a long time, and writers have kind of had to change with the times and relearn and relearn and relearn. For example, I talked about Data XML. And one of the things that created was the opportunity to output the same source into, say, HTML for an information center online, into PDFs that look like books, into, whatever you need to output it into. And so in some ways I see AI as, maybe it's like that kind of change on steroids, but it's a big change like that, where we can take a tool and it can help us output things into a lot of different ways. So for example, to me, one of the greatest things is the opportunity for personalization that AI could offer. But again, it goes back to that. So how do we actually need to use it? We still need the people who are going to write really good content, but then we need to be able to also structure it and have AI know what you're giving it and who that's for, so that we have the potential to output it to the right person at the right time and really give people the information they need, no more, no less, which kind of has always been our goal, I think, in both, whether it's on the tech writing end or the content design end. I think the most common, thing that we say is like, we want to give the right information to the right person at the right time. And I think that AI can help us do that. It can be a tool that would allow us to do that in a way that we aren't currently able to do it. But we need to be able to give it the information that it needs to do that.
So now that you're entering this new chapter of your career, and again, it's such a new landscape that you're also entering. If you were to give the person that was there, you're working your PhD or even earlier, the person who is picking that path forward, if you were to give them advice, what would it be?
Yeah, I feel like it's sticking with the fundamentals. So all the way back in my rhetoric PhD, we studied classical rhetoric and we studied the Aristotle's rhetorical situation with audience, purpose, and context, and some add-ons. But everything really is still based on that. So no matter how the tools change, no matter how the deliverables change, writing really always goes back to understanding that specific context that you're in, what your position is as the writer, who's going to be reading it, and what the goal is, both the user's goal and your goal as the rhetor. So to me, it's really stick with those foundations, get those down really solid, because that's what's going to never change. And the rest, be willing to be open and learn and be willing to change.
Yeah, it's a conversation I had with a previous guest, talking about how human creativity is ultimately a product of the theory of mind, right? It's the ability to step outside yourself and look from the outside in at process or a piece of art or anything, and put yourself into that audience's shoes. And I feel like, when you were saying before about these product or engineering leaders that are saying, well, what do writers really do? That's what they do. And coding doesn't do that. Even and generative AI can't do that yet. There are glimmers, but it's not there yet. So I'm wondering, like, as you're leading this team, how are you planning on beating that drum for them?
I think the thing to really keep in mind is the human aspect, because I feel like, all consumers are human. Like, we're selling products to other humans. We're not selling products to machines. So I feel like, we need to keep that human aspect as what's really core. And I feel like we need to keep in mind, what problems do we want to solve? In general, I feel like maybe overall we're getting some of this wrong. I feel like AI should solve problems. It shouldn't just do what it can do. Just because something's possible doesn't mean it's a good idea. So, are we using AI to solve actual problems, things that would actually make our lives better, make our work more efficient, help us to do more? Or are we using it to solve problems that we don't have? We don't have a problem of there's not enough creative people who want to make music. So I don't think we need to have AI music. That's not a problem that we have to solve. So why should we use it to solve something that's not a problem? But there are plenty of things where, AI could be really useful and could actually solve problems. And what I really wish for the future is that, in general, like in the workplace as well, think about what are actual problems that AI has the potential to help with, and focus on those, not just on what, is possible to be done with AI, but also in the world, to really think about what are our human problems that AI can help with, and not focus on things that are not our problems, but it can do for us. Because I think that's just, that's going down a path that's not going to help humanity be better. And I think that we need to be, if we want to continue being the kind of rulers of this world that we're on, then we need to be thinking about our needs, not just what's possible. And I feel like that's really something that we need to keep in mind as we make decisions about AI going forward, because obviously it has potential to do so much. But what's actually useful for us? What's actually going to help us? And what is going to maybe make our lives worse? And we don't need to be spending time and money and resources on those things, but, focusing on where can it actually help us.
So after having this conversation with me, do you see a theme or a through line that's kind of peeking through?
Yeah, I mean, I have always been a lifelong learner. I mean, you don't get a PhD if you don't really like learning. And my whole career has really been focused on learning and what's the next thing, and how can we take whatever's coming along and use it to our advantage. And a lot of that's been focused on raising the status of writing professions. And I think that that's kind of been the through line of my career, is that that's always been something that's really been close to my heart, at least since grad school, of, how can we take this skill set that is really unique? A lot of people think everyone can write, but not everybody can write that well. It takes systems thinking, it takes empathy, and also, the writing skill part. Not everyone has that. And we have this really specialized skill set. And I just feel like there's so much potential to use it for so much good in the world. And I feel like the more status that we can get in our professions, the more likely we are going to be to bring that in.
I think so, one of my coworkers recently posted on LinkedIn, they were like, of all the skills that will give you an advantage in this world, storytelling is that skill.
Right.
And whether or not that's, painting a picture or just communicating and helping people understand how things work together, I think it's very true.
It's been a really good conversation, and I've really enjoyed it, Alora.
Well, I have enjoyed it as well, Kate. So thank you very much.